Imagine your brain is like a supercomputer, right? Running this massive, impossibly complex simulation.
Right.
Now imagine the internal cooling fan just abruptly breaks. The processors keep firing, the data keeps pouring in, but the heat just has nowhere to go.
It's trapped.
Exactly. So that feeling of panic, of a complete meltdown when you were just completely overwhelmed or stressed out, your brain is literally physically overheating inside your skull. It's a full-on thermodynamic crisis.
Which is terrifying when you actually think about the mechanics of it.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this because today we were completely dismantling the way you think about a simple glass of water.
And honestly, it is long overdue. I mean, we treat water as this passive backdrop, right? Just the blank canvas of our biology.
Yeah, just the stuff we need to swallow our vitamins.
Exactly. We hyper-focus on the nutrients, the complex proteins, the neurotransmitters, and we just unconsciously assume that water is merely the empty space in between all those supposedly important things.
Which is exactly the assumption we're going to absolutely shatter on today's deep dive. We have an exclusive, staggering stack of documents on the table today for you.
A really fascinating set of texts.
Right, specifically focusing on this framework called Les Échos du Prisme des Odyssees. And we are zooming all the way in on a highly detailed, exclusive text titled Laboratoire de la Somatique Stratégique, Volume 1. And the subtitle is Water as a Regulatory Medium.
Yeah, and in this documentation, water isn't just plumbing. I mean, it's not just input and output.
Right.
It is the ultimate biological medium. It is the thermal and nervous regulator of our very presence in the world. And even more intriguingly, it's the foundation for an entire system of highly intentional somatic practices used by someone they call the operator.
Right, the operator.
Yep.
But before we take another step into this material, we need to kind of map the territory for you, the listener, because we'll be walking on two very different, though parallel paths today.
Yeah, think of it as a set of ground rules for this deep dive.
Good call.
The sources present this dual framework, essentially. On one side, we have rigorously documented clinical neurophysiology and biophysics.
The hard science.
Exactly, the hard science. These are the measurable, peer-reviewed biological facts regarding what water physically does within the human machine. But then on the other side, we have what they call the PRISM framework.
And the PRISM framework is where this operator comes in, right?
Precisely. The PRISM framework is a conceptual, intentional practice of somatic regulation. Basically, it's a philosophy and a set of actual rituals that the operator layers on top of those hard biological facts.
So we have to be careful to distinguish between the two.
We really do. We have to draw a line between a proven biophysical mechanism, like your vagus nerve reacting to cold, and the prison's conceptual application of that mechanism.
Where an operator actually uses that cold to intentionally anchor their consciousness.
Right. Our mission today is to explore that intersection, the exact point where hard biological science meets radical somatic intention.
Okay, but before we get to the esoteric stuff, the rituals, the operators, I need to understand the absolute baseline here. I mean, I drink water, I sweat, I go to the bathroom. What is actually happening in the middle of that cycle that makes this substance so foundational to the PRISM framework?
Well, let's look at the numbers.
Because when I hear that my body is 60 to 70% water, I mean, it just sounds like a fun trivia fact. It doesn't actually mean anything to me in a practical sense.
Let's break down what that 60 to 70% actually looks like then. The most critical metric in the clinical documentation here isn't the total volume. It's where that volume actually resides.
Okay.
40% of your total body weight is intracellular water.
Inside the cells.
Yes, that is the water trapped inside the lipid membranes of your cells. It's not just floating around in your stomach or cooling in your veins. It is the universal solvent for every single biochemical reaction that keeps you alive.
Wait, so it's not just like a swimming pool that the cellular structures float in? The cells are essentially made of it.
They are inflated by it, they're structured by it, and they're operated by it. I mean, it's the transport medium bringing nutrients in, it's the evacuation route flushing metabolic waste out, and vitally, it's the central regulator of your core temperature through evaporation.
Like sweat and breath.
Exactly. And this brings us to the hydration imperative that's outlined in the documents. The clinical data on sports and cognitive performance is honestly terrifyingly precise on this point.
Terrifying how?
Well, a mere 1 to 2% dehydration of your body mass triggers a measurable, cascading failure in cognitive presence.
Wait, 1 or 2%? That sounds like literally nothing. I mean, that's just a busy Tuesday where I skip my morning water bottle and have an extra coffee instead.
Yeah, and on that busy Tuesday, your vigilance measurably drops, your working memory stutters. But the most fascinating metric cited in the literature here is the increase in the subjective perception of effort.
What does that mean exactly? Subjective perception.
It means the exact same task. Let's say, writing a complex email or solving a tough problem actually feels significantly harder to your brain simply because you are marginally dehydrated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the physical mechanics of your cognition are dragging. So the documents emphasize that maintaining this baseline hydration isn't some wellness trend or a lifestyle choice for the operator.
It's an uncompromising requirement for cognitive presence.
Absolutely.
That makes total sense.
Okay.
Because if the cellular environment literally shrinks, the biological machinery just doesn't have the space to operate efficiently.
Right.
But the text goes way beyond just drinking water. It talks heavily about thermoregulation and its direct link to the autonomic nervous system, the ANS.
So the ANS is basically the control center for all your automatic physiological functions. We're talking heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, and most importantly for this framework, your stress response. And it's divided into two branches. You have the sympathetic branch, which is your fight or flight alert system, and you have a parasympathetic branch, which governs rest and digest or recovery.
Right, the brake pedal and the gas pedal.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And clinical hydrotherapy provides beautifully established documentation that thermal contact with water acts as a literal manual override switch for these branches.
So when I jump into a freezing cold lake, and I start gasping uncontrollably, that's not just me hating the cold. That's a systemic alarm going off.
That gasp is your sympathetic nervous system violently kicking into gear. The thermal shock of the cold water on your skin sends this immediate, massive signal to your brain that your survival is threatened.
Right, it thinks you're dying.
Yeah. Your body mobilizes energy, it constricts surface blood vessels to protect your core heat, and it spikes your alertness. You are forced into an acute state of physical presence.
And conversely, sliding into a hot bath.
The exact opposite mechanism takes over. The heat signals safety. It promotes vasodilation, so your blood vessels open up. And this activates the parasympathetic system, promoting muscle relaxation and increasing what we call vagal tone.
Vagal tone, meaning the activity of the vagus nerve.
Yes, the vagus nerve is the superhighway of the parasympathetic system. It wanders all the way from your brainstem down through your chest and deep into your abdomen, communicating directly with your heart and your digestive organs.
Okay, so higher vagal tone is a good thing.
A very good thing. The higher your vagal tone, the faster your body can relax after a stressful event. Clinical hydrotherapy uses hot and cold contrast specifically to exercise this system, rapidly switching between the sympathetic and parasympathetic states to build up nervous system resilience.
See, I am struggling to reconcile this with how we usually talk about health. I mean, we talk about ourselves like we are combustion engines. We need fuel, we need rest, we need to burn calories.
Right, the machine metaphor.
Yeah, but listening to this, it feels like that machine metaphor is completely backwards. If we were highly pressurized, heated fluid systems, then stepping into a hot shower isn't just washing dirt off. It is literally pulling a biological lever to hit the brakes on our neurology.
The fluid system is a far, far more accurate paradigm. Manipulating the thermal boundary of that system, your skin sends massive, cascading chemical signals deep into your neurology. You are altering the viscosity of the fluid and the speed of the signals within it.
Okay, so that is the macro level, the bulk water that we drink and we bathe in. But looking at the next section of the documents, the scale suddenly shifts in a big way.
It does.
Because if bulk water is regulating our macro temperature, what is happening down in the microscopic trenches? The sources move out of established clinical hydrotherapy here and dive headfirst into active biophysical research.
Yeah, this is where the conventional textbook view of water completely shatters. We are moving into the concept of structured water. Specifically, the documents reference a heavily researched laboratory phenomenon known as EZ water, or the exclusion zone, primarily documented by bioengineering researcher Gerald Pollack.
I gotta admit, exclusion zone sounds like a quarantined area in a sci-fi thriller, not a biological concept.
Right.
What exactly is structured water? Because I thought water was just H2O, period.
Well, normally we think of water in a bulk liquid state, right? Where
Yeah.
the H2O molecules are just tumbling chaotically, smashing into each other billions of times a second.
Right.
But Pollack's laboratory research demonstrates a fourth phase of water, When water comes into contact with hydrophilic surfaces,
Hydrophilic meaning surfaces that attract or love water?
correct. Much like the biological membranes of our own cells. So when water touches these surfaces and is exposed to radiant energy, specifically infrared light or just ambient photons from the environment, it changes state entirely.
Wait, it changes state.
Yes. It isn't a solid like ice, it isn't a gas like vapor, and it's no longer a chaotic liquid. It forms a highly ordered liquid crystalline phase.
Liquid crystalline, like an LCD screen.
Actually, very similar in concept, yeah. The molecules align into these dense, hexagonal, honeycomb-like layers pushing outward from the cellular membrane, and the chemical formula actually shifts from H2O to H3O2 minus.
Okay, wait, it literally changes chemical formula.
It does. And as for why it's called the exclusion zone, as this crystal lattice builds layer upon layer, it physically excludes impurities. It pushes solutes and even suspended particles out into the surrounding bulk water.
So it's basically a microscopic, self-purifying matrix.
Exactly. But here is the biophysical payload, the part that really matters. This structured water has a net negative electrical charge. The documents specify a resting potential of negative 150 millivolts.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the bulk water that was pushed away gains a positive charge from the excluded protons.
Hold on. You have a negatively charged zone right next to a positively charged zone, separated by a physical boundary. You just described a battery.
You are wrapped in trillions of them. Your cells are surrounded by a biological battery made entirely of structured water, and this battery is what allows for the ultra-fast transmission of electrical and metabolic information.
Wow.
Yeah. The documents detail the mechanics of this through something called the Grothus mechanism.
Okay, I read that section like 3 times, and I'm still struggling to picture it. It sounds like high-level quantum physics. How does this mechanism actually speed up signals in the body?
Let's use an analogy. Imagine normal bulk water is a crowded subway station during rush hour.
Easy to picture.
Right. If a proton, which is a positively charged particle carrying a signal, needs to get from one side of the station to the other, it has to physically swim and shove its way through the chaotic, tumbling crowd of water molecules.
Which takes time.
It's slow, it encounters massive resistance, and it costs a lot of energy.
Friction.
Exactly, but the highly ordered crystalline lattice of easy water is entirely different. Imagine an empty hallway with a moving walkway. In this structured state, the protons don't swim, they jump.
They jump.
It's a quantum bucket brigade. When a proton enters one end of a hydrogen bond chain in this structured water, it doesn't travel the whole length. Instead, its entry instantly forces the release of a different proton at the far end of the chain.
Oh, like a Newton's cradle. You drop a metal ball on one side, and the energy instantly kicks a different ball off the other side without the middle balls even moving.
That is a perfect visualization. The protons jump across the hydrogen bonds at a staggeringly rapid cadence. The documents cite a velocity of around 2,200 meters per second.
That's supersonic.
It is nearly instantaneous on a cellular scale. And the crucial takeaway here is that this mechanism reduces the energetic cost of biological transport to near zero. Structured water acts as a biological superconductor.
Okay, this brings up a huge question for me, because the sources contrast this beautiful, highly efficient superconductor with what they call destructured water inside the body.
Yes.
And they explicitly link this destructuring to poor hydration, toxins, or diets heavy in ultra-processed foods. So is the friction they mention just a metaphor for feeling tired? Or is it a literal physical friction inside the cell?
Oh, the friction is literal.
Yeah.
Biochemistry does not operate on metaphors. If you introduce chaos into the cellular environment, through ultra-processed foods that lack bioavailable water, through chronic dehydration, or through a heavy toxic load, you physically break down that crystalline structure.
So it turns back into the chaotic liquid.
Exactly. The water molecules at the cellular membrane revert to that disordered, tumbling, rush hour subway state.
So when a biological signal needs to travel, the Newton's cradle is just broken.
The signal doesn't get to use the quantum bucket brigade anymore. It has to swim through the chaos. It hits microscopic traffic. And the text explains that the cell then has to spend double the thermal energy just to attempt to restructure this chaotic water so it can perform basic metabolic functions.
Wow.
Yeah, this friction slows down cellular fluxes and generates literal slag, metabolic waste that builds up because the evacuation routes are compromised.
This is wild. It's like trying to run a high-speed bullet train on warp-rusted tracks. You feel sluggish because your cells are quite literally burning extra fuel just to force basic signals through a disorganized, chaotic medium.
And this exact point is where the documents transition from cellular theory to the most demanding thermodynamic engine in the human body, the brain.
Okay, let's go there.
Because to truly grasp why this cellular friction matters, we have to look at the organ that is 77% water.
77%, which
Yeah.
makes perfect sense now. If it's doing the most electrical processing, it obviously needs the most superconductive material.
It desperately needs it. The energetic demand of the brain is frankly absurd when you look at the math. The documents lay it out pretty clearly. The brain accounts for roughly 2% of your total body mass, yet it monopolizes 20 to 25% of your total glucose and oxygen intake.
It's a tiny organ hogging a quarter of the entire body's power grid. What is it doing with all that energy? I mean, it's not lifting weights.
Over 70% of that massive energy budget is engulfed by a single, relentless biophysical mechanism, maintaining ionic gradients, specifically powering the sodium-potassium pumps.
Okay, I definitely need another analogy here, because maintaining ionic gradients sounds like a textbook from a chemistry class I failed.
Fair enough. Think of these pumps as microscopic, highly aggressive bouncers standing at the doors of a nightclub. The nightclub being the membrane of every single neuron.
Okay, bouncers. I like it.
These bouncers are constantly, tirelessly shoving sodium ions out of the cell and pulling potassium ions into the cell against their natural inclination to just balance out. They do this to maintain a very specific electrical tension, a negative charge known as the resting potential.
Because if the tension isn't there, the neuron can't fire a signal when it needs to.
Right. It's like pulling back the string of a bow and just holding it there. If those bouncers stop, if the pump fails, the electrical gradient collapses, the neuron depolarizes permanently, and you lose cognitive function.
So they have to keep working no matter what.
Exactly. To keep this massive electrical operation running, the brain requires a constant critical blood flow of 750 milliliters per minute.
Just to keep the bouncers working, just to keep the lights on.
Just to maintain the baseline. But thermodynamics dictates a very harsh reality. You cannot burn that much energy without generating a byproduct.
Heat.
Heat. Heat is the direct, unavoidable result of cognitive effort. Every time those pumps work, they hydrolyze ATP, the cellular energy currency, and they release thermal energy.
Ah. So the brain is basically an engine constantly revving at the red line.
And it operates within a dangerously strict thermal window between 37.2 and 38.5 degrees Celsius. The massive blood flow and that 77% water composition act as a liquid cooling system. It is a radiator, pulling the heat away from the deep structures of the brain and circulating it out.
Which brings us back to the broken fan in the supercomputer from our intro. This is where the deep dive honestly blew my mind, because the sources take this lesson in thermodynamics and apply it directly to neurodivergence, specifically autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and profiles of chronic severe stress.
Yes, this section is revolutionary.
They argue that a cognitive meltdown isn't a psychological failing, isn't just someone being overly emotional or sensitive.
No, it is a literal biophysical thermal crisis. The brain is quite literally overheating.
I really want to linger on this because it reframes so much about human empathy and just how we view stress in general. How exactly does a sensory overload turn into a thermodynamic meltdown?
Well, we have to look at sensory gating. In neurotypical brains, the thalamus acts as a filter, ignoring millions of bits of irrelevant sensory data, the hum of the refrigerator, the texture of your shirt, the flickering of a fluorescent light.
Right, you just tune it out.
But in neurodivergent profiles, or even under extreme chronic stress in neurotypical people, this sensory gating is altered. The brain is processing vastly more incoming data.
It's trying to render everything at 4K resolution simultaneously.
Exactly. This requires massive, continuous cognitive effort, which means the sodium-potassium pumps go into overdrive. More ATP is burned. And more ATP burned means an enormous rapid generation of heat.
Right.
During a phase of acute sensory overload, the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical executive part of the brain desperately trying to manage this overwhelming input, exhausts its local glucose supply.
The cooling system fails.
It cannot keep up with the thermal load. The documents cite striking data here. Localized areas of the brain, particularly the parieto-occipital areas dealing with sensory input, can heat up to 39.1 degrees Celsius during these episodes.
For the American listeners, 39.1 Celsius is over 102 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a dangerous high-grade fever, but localized entirely inside the skull.
It is a localized fever of the mind. The biological water, especially if it is destructured by dehydration or lacking the proper mineral conductivity, is no longer able to conduct the heat away or transmit the signals fast enough.
Wow.
The biological battery drains, the bouncers fail to maintain the gradient, and the system experiences a thermodynamic shutdown to protect itself from permanent damage. That is what a meltdown actually is.
That is profound. It completely removes the stigma from the experience of feeling overwhelmed. It's a mechanical limitation of the biological water's ability to handle the thermal load.
Precisely.
Okay, so knowing all of this, knowing that water is a thermal regulator, a biological superconductor, and the crucial cooling fluid for our most energy-hungry organ,
Mm.
how does the PRISM framework actually interact with this?
This is the pivot point.
Right, because we said at the beginning that PRISM is a practice. If I am an operator and my internal fan is breaking, how do I manually fix it?
This is where we cross the bridge from established biophysics into the phenomenology of the operator. How does an individual intentionally wield these realities? The PRISM framework categorizes water into 4 specific states for somatic practice.
And to be clear, these aren't just the 3 states of matter we learned in 3rd grade science. There is a specific, actionable somatic application for each one. So let's explore state 1, solid, ice, crystal, fixation.
Let's look at the physical reality first. When you apply solid freezing water ice or extremely cold water to the face, specifically targeting the areas around the eyes and the cheeks, you stimulate the trigeminal nerve.
Okay.
This triggers a deeply embedded evolutionary physiological response called the mammalian dive reflex.
The dive reflex, that's what happens to whales and seals when they go into deep freezing water, right?
Yes, and humans have it too. The instant that cold hits the trigeminal nerve, it forces an immediate activation of the vagus nerve. It violently pulls the emergency brake on your heart rate, slowing it down to conserve oxygen, and rapidly shuts down the sympathetic panic response.
So how does the operator actually use this?
The PRISM application takes that biological reflex and infuses it with intention. In this framework, the solid state of water is viewed as an agent of concentration and anchoring. It is used to fix or encode structure.
I see.
When the operator's mind is racing, when that thermal load we discussed is climbing toward a crisis point, they use the solid state of water to literally freeze the chaos. The physical shock forces the scattered nervous system back into a structured, intensely present state.
It's a manual override. It's a shock to the system that screams, stop processing the future. Pay attention to exactly this millimeter of skin right now.
Absolutely.
Which leads us naturally to state 2, liquid.
Yeah.
Flux, dissolution, transport. This is obviously the most common state we interact with, right?
Wow.
Showering, washing our hands, drinking a glass of water. How does the PRISM framework elevate these mundane actions?
The PRISM application here borrows from the ancient alchemical concept of solvent, coagulate, dissolve, and coagulate. Liquid water dissolves what can be dissolved and transports what needs to circulate.
So it's about flow. It's about moving the metabolic slag.
It is about cognitive and physical movement. When the operator ingests water consciously or stands under a shower, the mental intention is deliberately aligned with the biological reality of the fluid. They are actively visualizing the water, dissolving the metabolic waste we talked about, clearing the synaptic friction, and facilitating the flow of signals.
I see. So the physical washing of dirt off the hands becomes a cognitive clearing of the mental slate. It acts like a decompression chamber for the mind. You walk in, carrying the friction of the day, and you use the liquid state to basically strip it away before entering the next room.
A physical and cognitive reset.
What about state 3? Gaseous, vapor, breath, liberation.
We often forget that we interact with gaseous water constantly. I mean, the biological reality is that every single human exhales between 300 to 400 milliliters of water vapor every single day.
Almost half a liter of water. We are just breathing it out into the atmosphere.
Yes, it is a crucial component of our thermal and fluid regulation. In the PRISM framework, vapor is viewed as the explicit, visible link between the internal body and the external environment. Exhaling isn't just about emptying the lungs of carbon dioxide.
It's heat exhaust.
Exactly. It is a literal release of metabolic heat and cellular combustion residues. It is the liberation of that internal thermal tension from the overheated brain.
So when you're frustrated and you let out a long, heavy, dramatic sigh, you aren't just being theatrical. You are literally venting heat and water vapor from your internal engine to prevent a meltdown.
Precisely. Your biology is trying to regulate itself. The operator recognizes that fact, and acknowledging it changes the intention behind how they breathe. They use the breath deliberately as an exhaust valve for thermal load.
All right, this brings us to state 4, which is entirely unique to the PRISM framework. And this requires a bit of a leap. State 4, cellular, contact, exchange, relation.
As we establish in our rules of engagement, this one requires careful parsing. Let's start with the biological reality.
Okay.
Intimate physical contact between humans and embrace skin-to-skin contact, mucosal contact, inevitably involves the exchange of biological fluids, microbiota, sweat, and chemical signals like pheromones. We are constantly exchanging biological data through cellular water when we touch.
But the PRISM framework takes this literal exchange of sweat and microbes and turns it into a conceptual philosophy.
Yes. The prism conceptual metaphor posits that this cellular water exchange acts as a vector of intention between individuals. It treats the shared biological water as a medium for emotional and neurological co-regulation.
Right.
Now, I must be unequivocally clear here. The idea that a specific intention can ride on exchanged fluids is a conceptual metaphor for the practice. It's how the operator visualizes empathy and connection. It is not an established biophysical mechanism in the way that the trigeminal nerve reflex is.
Understood. It's the psychological software running on top of the physical hardware exchange. It's fascinating, though, because it forces you to view connection not just as a feeling, but as a literal merging of biological waters.
Exactly.
So how does a listener actually apply these states of water in daily life? The sources detail a highly specific cycle of practice used by the operator. It's essentially a protocol for interacting with water.
It's a beautifully ritualized protocol. The documents outline a four-phase loop that turns a completely mundane interaction with water, like washing your face at the end of the day or taking a morning shower, into a deliberate, engineered nervous system reset. The four phases are contact, immersion, separation, and return.
Let's walk through them experientially. Paint a picture for me. Phase 1, contact.
Contact happens before a single drop of water touches your skin. It is the mental projection, the mentalization phase. It requires you to internally, explicitly name what you are trying to dissolve, transform, or anchor before you turn on the tap. You are preparing the nervous system to receive the stimulus.
So you don't just mindlessly step into the shower worrying about an argument you had at work. You stand outside the shower and actively think, I'm about to wash the thermal tension of that argument off my biology.
Exactly. Because if you frame it that way, when you transition to phase 2 immersion, your brain is primed to interpret the physical sensation entirely differently.
Makes sense.
Immersion is the actual physical reception of the water. In this phase, the operator pays hyper-specific, almost microscopic attention to the temperature, the pressure, the sheer texture of the water on the skin.
You're forcing your brain to process the immediate present moment, which probably stops it from burning all that ATP on anxious future casting.
That is the precise mechanism. You are redirecting the processing power. Then comes phase 3, separation. According to the texts, this is perhaps the most critical and honestly the most frequently ignored phase.
Why is it ignored?
Because people just rush out of the bathroom. Separation is the conscious, decisive act of stepping away. For example, turning off the shower and making the deliberate cognitive decision that you are not carrying the day's stress past the boundary of the bathroom door. You are separating from the water, and simultaneously separating from the state of mind you possessed before the water.
I love that. You are physically closing the tab in your browser. You are finalizing the task.
And finally, phase 4, return. This is the stabilization phase post-ritual. It is simply taking a moment to recognize the new biological baseline, to physically feel the lowered heart rate, the cooled skin, the regulated breathing before rushing into the next task.
It's like giving your autonomic nervous system a physical reboot command using temperature and intention. And what makes this protocol so powerful is how the documents break down the 5 senses of water. Because during these rituals, we aren't just feeling the wetness. We are bombarding the brain with multiple data streams.
Water interacts with our nervous system through incredibly diverse pathways. The tactile pathway is the most obvious, the physical pressure and thermal shock on the skin, but the sources also highlight the sonic pathway.
The sound of it.
Right. The specific acoustic frequencies of running water, the white noise of a shower or a stream, actually help synchronize alpha waves in the brain, which promotes a state of relaxed, waking alertness.
I always wondered why a babbling brook or a rain soundscape is universally used for sleep apps. It's not just a nice sound. It's literally tuning our brain waves.
The physics of the sound structure, your neurology. Then there is the gustatory pathway. Drinking water slowly, feeling it coat the throat, consciously engages the vagus nerve through the receptors in the esophagus.
Right.
Visually, the contemplation of water looking out over a lake or even just watching rain hit a window has been shown to activate the brain's default mode network in a way that promotes deep reflection and rapidly reduces acute anxiety.
And my personal favorite, which I had no idea had such a biological impact, the olfactory pathway, the smell of rain hitting dry earth.
Petrichor.
Petrichor is
Yeah.
fascinating. It is actually the scent of geosmin, a chemical compound released by soil bacteria when they are exposed to water. The human olfactory bulb is incredibly sensitive to it, and the olfactory bulb has a direct primary connection to the limbic system, which is the emotional and memory center of the brain.
So it bypasses logic entirely? Completely. Because water is so vital to survival, the smell of rain is an evolutionary trigger that instantly signals safety and relief to the deep brain.
So when you stack these together, the smell of the rain, the sound of the shower, the physical temperature shift, you are essentially hacking your own biology. You are giving your nervous system overwhelming evidence that it is safe, that the thermal crisis is over, and that it can begin to repair.
You are stacking the biological deck in favor of recovery. Yeah.
Which brings us back to the breath. Because we don't shower all day, we don't drink all day, but we are constantly exhaling water vapor. The text calls this the breath-water intention loop.
As we established, our breath is a continuous emission of metabolic water. When we exhale, we are pushing out water vapor that evaporated specifically because our body was working furiously to maintain that strict 37-degree core temperature. Our breath carries the physical byproduct, the exhaust of our biological effort.
Okay, so how does the PRISM framework utilize this constant exhalation of moisture?
They introduce a very specific metric called humidiance, represented in the text by the letter H.
Humidiance. Is that just a fancy word for humidity?
It's deeper than that. In the sources, humidiance is described as the measure of the biological substrate's purity and conductivity. It is a theoretical metric of how efficiently the structured water inside your body and the ambient moisture in the air immediately around you can transmit signals without friction.
So high humidiance means you have a highly conductive, low-friction environment. Your quantum bucket brigade is working perfectly.
Exactly. But the fascinating leap they make is regarding environmental humidity. The document suggests that in a humid environment, the water vapor suspended in the air acts as a dielectric constant.
Okay, you can have to translate dielectric constant for me.
In physics, a dielectric is an insulating material that can be polarized by an applied electric field. When you introduce an electrical signal, the molecules in a dielectric align themselves to support and stabilize that signal. The claim made in the PRISM text is that in human environments, the ambient water molecules act as the stabilizer. Therefore, the transmission of intentional signals or cognitive focus can be up to 30% more stable than in dry, arid environments simply because the ambient moisture helps organize the energetic field.
Okay, I have to push back here. I mean, I love the concept, but how on earth do you prove that? Are they seriously claiming you can measure the intent someone puts into a room? Because that crosses the line from biophysics straight into magic.
Your skepticism is entirely warranted, and the distinction is vital here. Whether an individual's conscious intention can literally restructure the ambient water vapor in a room is part of the PRISM's conceptual philosophy.
Yeah.
It is how the operator visualizes their impact on their environment. It is unproven.
Okay, good.
However, the internal regulation, the calming of your own thermal and nervous systems via intentional breathing and interacting with that moisture is absolute measurable science.
Right. The external influence is theory, but the internal effect is established biology.
And the researchers in the documents actually developed a brilliant methodology to measure this internal sensitivity, which they call plastoreactivity. They detail a specific test called the acoustic drop protocol.
I was captivated by this part of the reading. It is so elegantly simple, but the biological response is so intense.
It is a masterclass in neurophysiological testing. The protocol goes like this. The subject lies down and rests in complete silence for 10 full minutes. The goal is to allow their nervous system to reach a deep baseline of stasis, lowering the heart rate, minimizing the sympathetic drive.
Just getting completely calm.
Then, at exactly the 10-minute mark, The researcher drops a single physical drop of room temperature water directly onto the subject's forehead.
Specifically on the glabella, right, the space between the eyebrows.
Yes, the glabella is highly innervated, just one single drop of water breaking 10 minutes of silence. And because it is a natural sound and a natural, non-threatening sensation, it doesn't trigger a massive, overwhelming panic response.
Right, if you blew an air horn after 10 minutes of silence, the subject would go into full shock.
Exactly. But the sound and feel of a water drop triggers a very specific micro-discharge of the sympathetic system.
It's a startle, a moment of pure surprise, but a safe one. What exactly are the researchers looking for when that drop hits?
They use high-resolution biometric sensors to measure how fast the body's internal water network reorganizes and recovers from that microshock. They measure the galvanic conductance of the skin and the minute variations in heart rate variability to see exactly how quickly the parasympathetic system kicks back in to say, stand down, it is just a drop of water.
To measure the bounce back.
This recovery time, the speed at which the biology returns to baseline, is their measure of cluster reactivity. It indicates how flexible, structured, and resilient the subject's internal biological water matrix actually is.
That is incredible. So what does this all mean for the listener? If I am not an operator lying in a laboratory having water dropped on my forehead, how do I actually use this information tomorrow morning?
It means understanding that every single interaction you have with water is an opportunity for regulation. When you feel that thermal overload approaching, when you feel the cognitive friction building up, the stress compounding, and you know you are heading toward a meltdown, you have biophysical tools at your disposal.
You don't have to just sit there and overheat. You can splash freezing water on your face to trigger the trigeminal nerve and violently halt the sympathetic spiral.
Yes. You can step into a shower and focus entirely on the physical sensation, utilizing the contact, immersion, separation, return loop to force your brain out of its stressful future casting and ground it in the present reality of the liquid state. You can focus on exhaling slowly, actively visualizing the release of that built-up metabolic heat with every breath of water vapor you push out of your lungs.
It's about taking the basic plumbing of our bodies, the input and output we talked about at the very beginning, and realizing that it is actually an incredibly sophisticated control panel.
That is an elegant synthesis. Water is not a passive element we simply consume to survive another day. It is a highly structured, electrically charged, thermodynamic medium. It is the superconductor of our biology. By understanding its clinical effects on the nervous system, the way it governs our temperature, our heart rate, and the literal physical speed of our thoughts, we can use it deliberately.
To change our entire state of being.
Through cold exposure, conscious hydration, and mindful breathing, we have the proven ability to regulate our physical and emotional states at a cellular level.
It fundamentally changes how you look at a glass of water on your desk. It is no longer just hydration. It is structural integrity.
It is the biological matrix that holds the capacity for your intention.
Incredible. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the quantum bucket brigades to the thermal limits of the human brain. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about your day. Next time you take a sip of water, wash your hands, or just see your breath hanging in the air on a cold winter day, ask yourself, are you just going through the unconscious motions of surviving? Or are you actively reprogramming the crystalline structure of your own cellular battery? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and stay curious.